Your Excellency, South Africa's biggest exports are gold, platinum, coal, cars and diamonds. What is South Africa's main export to Malaysia? And could you also tell us about the size of trade and investment between both countries?
Well, first of all, good morning, Datu. Thank you very much for the opportunity for the interview.
It's my pleasure.
And it's always good to interact with the Malaysian audience so that we can get the message out about South Africa and about Africa and the natural ties that exist between us.
Absolutely.
As countries and as regions. To your question, thank you very much. Most people would know South Africa for gold and diamonds, but also we are number one in the world for a number of other minerals, such as chrome, manganese, platinum, vanadium. We're number two in the world for minerals such as palladium, number three for coal. But we also have market supremacy in some other areas. For example, citrus fruits, we're second to Spain as the world's second biggest citrus exporter. To the heart of your question, the trade, luckily, between us is growing. Between 2020 and 2021, it grew 15.7%. It's currently at about 21 billion rand, which is about 5.5 billion ringgit. Unfortunately for me, but fortunately for Malaysia, that's almost 3-to-1 in Malaysia's favor in terms of the trade balance. And that's largely on the back of the petroleum products and the palm oil that Malaysia exports to South Africa. From South Africa to Malaysia, we export primarily manganese and also various products under the fruit product lines. We have, I think, 24% market share of the fruit exports to Malaysia, which is quite a significant share, but I think we can still grow on that fruit export share of the Malaysian market. The one area where we believe we can offer a quality product, where currently we don't have the access that we think we should have, is in meat, in beef, in lamb, in mutton. We have halal certification. We have been exporting to halal markets for many decades, but currently we only have one abattoir, which is accredited for the Malaysian market by JAKIM. And we believe that in the current environment where the food prices are rising, we can offer a quality product that is competitive with any of the meat products you currently have at a better price.
Where are we currently exporting most of our meat from, Malaysia? Would you know?
Malaysia at the moment is primarily importing meat from Australia, from India and from New Zealand. The biggest share of the meat market is from Australia.
I see.
And we believe, as I've said, we can offer the same quality, if not better, in areas like lamb at a price that's more competitive.
Excellent.
So we think that that's one area where we can definitely have a bigger share in the Malaysian market. In general, in halal, although we have a relatively small Muslim population, we have, I think we're in the top 5 to 7 global halal producers. So we have the products that can service the Malaysian market. You're a net food importer. And we think that we can provide the products that you need at more competitive prices. So that's what we've been working on. But we also think there's massive opportunities for Malaysia in Africa. So one of the ideas we've been looking at with Malaysians is to have halal parks in South Africa, where we leverage the fact that Malaysia is the top halal accreditor and producer in the world. And then South Africa can provide Malaysian producers the access to the African market. It's a unified market now under the African Continental Free Trade Area.
So you're looking at Malaysian companies setting up
in South Africa,
manufacturing plants and
joint ventures with South African companies.
I see.
There's 500 to 600 million Muslims in Africa. It's now an integrated market under the African Continental Free Trade Area. And we can provide the retail access, the banking access, the infrastructure access as a gateway for Malaysian companies to reach into Africa.
So are there companies that are that you have identified from Malaysia that are doing this or will be doing this with South Africa?
Well, not specific companies, but obviously we've been talking to the various chambers, to the Malaysian International Chamber of Commerce and Industry, various other chambers, the Federation of Malaysian Manufacturers, and then some individual business people. There's one Malaysian businessman in South Africa who has 2 factories, who's willing to assist other Malaysian companies in terms of providing advice, to provide information from his experience on the ground. And his is a fascinating story which proves the case why this would be in Malaysia's benefit. His company also has various divisions, for example, in China. His South Africa division reach the same level as the China division, but at a far greater profitability. So in terms of volumes, they're now the same. But in terms of the profit margins, his South Africa operation is bigger than his China operation.
Oh, okay. Wow.
So that shows the opportunities
the
for business
potential.
in South Africa and Africa are
And I
huge.
think also, I could be wrong, but South Africa could be the gateway to the rest of Africa for Malaysian
Absolutely,
companies.
yeah. And I think this is a natural fit between us because we see Malaysia as a gateway to ASEAN. And equally, South Africa can be a gateway for Malaysia and other ASEAN countries into Africa.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Is Malaysia close to South Africa? Among all the countries on the east coast of Africa, would Malaysia be closer to South Africa than any other countries?
Well, I think many African countries have good relations with Malaysia. But I think if you go back in the history, we have a particular relationship with Malaysia that goes back over 350 years.
Okay.
There's currently a community in Cape Town called the Cape Malay community. And that goes back to the historical and cultural linkages that were created during the times of the Dutch colonizers, who brought people from the Malay archipelago to South Africa, introduced Islam to South Africa through that movement of people. And those cultural and cuisine and historical and language ties still exist through the Cape Malay community. And even some of the words in Afrikaans, for example, we have blakjan, pisang, asbak that have come from this part of the world,
Yeah. I don't think many Malaysians or Malays in Malaysia know this.
Yeah, well, that's part of the thing, is to get the message out that there are these natural ties that exist between us. And we have so many similarities as countries in terms of what we need, in terms of what we want, and in terms of the historical...
And even the accent, I find that the South African accent, when you speak English, is very similar to the Malaysian way of speaking English.
Exactly, exactly. And then, of course, Malaysia supported us in the anti-apartheid struggle.
Yes.
And as a result, the relationship that Dr. Mahathir had with people like President Mandela, President Mbeki, was extremely close.
Yeah. We've done a lot of work on that, so we know this. Okay, between 1960s and 1990s, as a member of the Commonwealth realm, Malaysia supported international action to end apartheid in South Africa, as you just mentioned. Since the formation of diplomatic relations in 1993, how have the ties between the two countries evolved over the last 30 years? You mentioned we've gone back 350 years. Now, over the last 30 years, how has it intensified? How has the relationship been?
I would characterize the bilateral relationship in 3 phases. And that's from the time where we opened formal diplomatic relations in November 1993. So next year we'll be celebrating the 30th anniversary of diplomatic relations. I think the first phase you could take from 1993 to about 2005, where we had a very close and dynamic relationship. And that was built on Malaysian investment in South Africa, on thriving business ties, but also on the personal relationship that Dr. Mahathir at the time had with President Mandela, President Mbeki. And Malaysia had a very strong focus on South-South cooperation, on relationships with Africa through the Langkawi Dialogue, the Southern African International Dialogue. The second phase, from about 2005, 2008, at the time of the financial crisis, until recently, was a more dormant phase. The relationship basically leveled out. It continued, but it wasn't really growing. So it was, in a way, it was stagnant.
This is from what year to what year?
From about 2005 until currently. Well, in the last couple of years before COVID. I think the focus of South Africa and Malaysia became far more internal on domestic politics. Then we had a focus primarily on Africa for a while. Malaysia had a focus on ASEAN. So we kind of lost strategic focus on each other.
I see.
And that's why now we're in the third phase, where we're working on strengthening and revitalizing that partnership based on an understanding that we need to regain that strategic focus because it's in the mutual interests of both of us, as South Africa, Malaysia, as ASEAN and Africa, to get closer to each other.
How are we working on getting that closer? Is there some strategy being employed?
Oh, absolutely. So, for example, next year, the 30th anniversary, we have extended an invitation to His Majesty the Agong from President Ramaphosa for him to visit South Africa on a state visit.
And that's next year?
That's next year. During the 30th anniversary, 2023. So we feel that having His Majesty... Sorry?
What month is that?
We haven't received the final dates for the visit, but we feel that having His Majesty come to South Africa will send a signal at the highest political level that the
I
two
think so.
countries are re-engaging, revitalizing and strengthening. And then we'll have the South African Foreign Minister coming to Malaysia, the Malaysian Foreign Minister coming to South Africa.
Excellent.
And
We'd love to cover that.
oh, well, definitely. We'll work together on that.
Yeah.
And then, of course, we'll be participating in things like the Malaysian International Halal Showcase, a number of events through the year to showcase that there's mutual benefits to the strengthening.
Yeah.
But also politically, I mean, there's things that we're both passionate about, like the Palestinian cause, like issues of the South, that we can work together on. And there's relationships that need to be built between Africa and ASEAN.
Yes, I think that's
that
very
will be
important.
Yeah.
I think the future belongs to the emerging markets.
Absolutely.
And the strength that they bring together in unison.
Absolutely, yes.
Because if we work in silos, we are never strong.
No, exactly. Together we can make a difference. Yeah.
Even in Africa, if it's united, it becomes strong. But if Africa and ASEAN unite, the emerging markets have a voice, and that's what we don't have.
Absolutely, yeah, no, absolutely.
So I have a question. So you say we formation of diplomatic relations in 1993, but prior to that, were we not having diplomatic relations, South Africa and Malaysia?
Yeah, no, because Malaysia took a very strong stand against apartheid. And being a member of the anti-apartheid forces,
that way,
it was not possible to have diplomatic relations with the government at that time.
I see. Okay. Good. Mahathir was very far thinking then, wasn't he?
Absolutely.
South Africa is a powerful economic and driving political force in the African Union. Could you tell us more about the cooperation and partnership between the African Union and ASEAN and South Africa, Africa's role in it?
I think that's a very good question, because Africa and ASEAN working together, as we've just said, would become a very powerful force. Politically, economically. We are two of the fastest growing regions in the world, so it's natural that we should work together.
Definitely.
We're both quite advanced in terms of regional integration. The African Union, as I said earlier, has set up the African Continental Free Trade Area. Now, at the institutional level, that was 3 years ago.
Okay, and where is that free trade?
It covers the whole of Africa.
The whole of Africa.
Every single member of the African Union is part of the African Continental Free Trade Area. So we now have an integrated market of 1.4 billion people that Malaysia can tap into, other ASEAN members can tap into, and equally ASEAN is an integrated region that's of benefit to us. So it's a natural fit. There have been attempts over the years to have a more institutional relationship between ASEAN and the African Union. Actually started by South Africa. In 2002, President Mbeki was the first non-ASEAN head of state that was invited to address an ASEAN summit. And he was invited as the African Union chair at the time in 2002. So he went to Phnom Penh in Cambodia and suggested this relationship be institutionalized. However, I think in hindsight, looking back, we made a strategic error. Instead of doing it as ASEAN-African Union, we then created something called the New Asian African Strategic Partnership, which, apart from a couple of projects in support of Palestine, never really took off. For the main reason that the key Asian members had their own relationships with Africa. So we had the Forum for China-Africa Cooperation, we had TICAD, the Japanese one, we had the India-Africa, and because of those relationships, they were unwilling to really work under a NASP Asia-Africa framework. I think if we'd concentrated more as ASEAN-African Union, it would have been more successful.
So. And what do you mean by institutionalizing?
Well, to have the ASEAN Secretariat working together with the African Union Commission. So there were attempts around 2012 when the AU Commission visited the ASEAN Secretariat in Jakarta to try and get a relationship. But I think there's a lot of work that would still need to be done to institutionalize that relationship between the ASEAN Secretariat, African Union Commission. As individual African countries, of course, we're working very strongly with ASEAN. South Africa, we have signed an amity cooperation agreement with ASEAN. We're hoping next year to become strategic dialogue partners with, sectoral dialogue partners with ASEAN. And there's others like Egypt and Nigeria, the same. But I think as a collective of the African Union, there's more that we can do together with ASEAN as a grouping.
But it shouldn't be too political. The businesses should drive it.
Absolutely.
If it's going to thrive, it's the businesses independently working with one another and driving that, you know?
100%.
Even with ASEAN, it's very much a political body.
Yes.
And so it's sometimes nothing really moves forward because it's very political. But when you let the businesses become a part of it,
Absolutely.
they become the driving force. So is that going to be part of the plan for?
Oh, absolutely. We need to create the space and the environment where the businesses can actually work together.
Yes.
And I've often heard business saying we want to succeed because of government, not despite government.
Absolutely.
So it needs government to say, okay, here's the space where you can interact.
If the government takes a step back and say, you do your thing, because the wealth creators know how to drive the economy.
Yes.
So too much regulation, too much policy, it sort of hampers the natural economic drive.
Absolutely.
So I think if African Union and ASEAN is going to be able to move forward for the betterment of all the nations, they have to let the businesses be a big partner in this.
And there's huge opportunities, even leveraging on other things like the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative.
Yeah, right.
There's the links from Kunming down into ASEAN, where South Africa and many African countries could be bringing products in through Malaysia, transshipment hubs in Malaysia, servicing the ASEAN market, Chinese market. There's so much that we can do together.
Absolutely. Looking forward to this. When do you think this will actually happen? I mean, just a
we're working
educated guess. You know?
We're working as hard as we can to achieve these things. I think the first step is to achieve that strategic focus again. That was lost.
Yes.
There was a time where Malaysia had a very strong focus on South-South cooperation.
Yes.
That's been lost.
That was during Diplomat's time.
Exactly. So what I personally have been saying to many of the Malaysian interlocutors and ministers and so on that I've been meeting, and we'll do the same with the new government when it comes in, is to say Malaysia needs to be asking itself the question, why are so many countries coming into Africa in a huge way? If you look at China, Brazil, Turkey, UAE, Saudi, all of them have a very strong focus on Africa. They're coming into Africa bringing billions of dollars. But yet Malaysia is missing.
Malaysia's too inward looking right now.
Exactly.
We are lost. Yes, I'm not afraid to say this, but we are lost. We're looking inward. We are being too politically squabbling within each other. We are not outward looking. We really have to, put our house in order and just move forward. And that's when the focus, that you cannot be fighting yourself. You should be looking at outside and saying how I can compete with the rest of the world.
And it's in the interest of the Rakyat to have that focus.
But the people are not having the interest of the Rakyat.
I think, one thing that COVID has taught us, and including Malaysia, is that you can't have a limited supply chain.
Absolutely.
You need a diversified supply chain. And in this era now, with conflict in other parts of the world, and rising inflation, rising food prices, you need those alternative food supplies.
Definitely.
And in the future, Africa is the future of food security. 60% of arable land in the future is in Africa. So Malaysia needs to be re-engaging Africa.
And what I feel from the pulse of how Africans speak, they are becoming very independent.
Absolutely.
It's like we don't have to be tied down to what is how we've been told to do or how we're told to be. We are independent.
Exactly.
And I think the African Union is going to make a huge difference.
It has been, it has been. We've created our own narrative.
Absolutely.
Previously, the narrative was said about us.
Yes.
And now we've created our own narrative to the extent that many international headlines are talking of Africa rising.
Yes.
And that's the fact of the matter, is that Africa is the huge growth point.
I'm using in every single interview with ambassadors or high commissioners from Africa, we use that Africa rising.
Exactly, No, that is the story.
Even in yours, at some point, you'll see the word Africa rising in it.
Absolutely.
So please tell us about what you do to increase the awareness of South Africa in Malaysia.
I think that's a very important element because we have lost the strategic focus. So it's bringing the stories back for the Malaysian general public, but also for Malaysian decision makers to say that, listen, these are the opportunities that exist in Africa, that exist in South Africa for Malaysia to the mutual benefit of both. And of course, myself as a High Commissioner, all I can really do is engage with publications like yourselves, is give speeches, is reach out to various audiences, be they chambers of commerce, be they organizations like the Young Professionals Organization or Rotary Clubs, or as many opportunities as I can identify to meet people, to get the message out, and to bring back stories that people were aware of at some point but seem to have lost, about the Cape Malay linkages, about the historical cultural linkages, about the passions that we share together as developing countries for issues of climate change, of the Indian Ocean, of the Palestinian cause and so on. We belong to various organizations together, like the Non-Aligned Movement, like the Indian Ocean Rim Association, and it's to identify the areas that are of common need that we can work on together.
What are the most endearing aspects of Malaysia to you as a South African?
Well, I think primarily it's the people. There's so many resonances amongst the people in Malaysia that I identify as a South African.
Yeah.
We also come from a multicultural, multi-ethnic society. And it's about how you come together as a unified people to identify yourselves as South Africans or as Malaysians rather than your ethnic label or your language label. So that's been very instructive to me to see how we deal with these issues as countries with very similar backgrounds. And of course, you know, it's a beautiful country in terms of the areas you can visit. The cuisine is fantastic, although I'm still not a fan of durian. I'm still acquiring that taste.
It's the best fruit in the world.
What's also been fascinating for me, I first came in 2003 with President Mbeki for the NAM Summit. And it's to see how Malaysia has progressed since I was here in 2003. From a personal point of view, my grandfather was here in 1950-51 as part of the British Army during the emergency. So it's to be able to come to a place that's got some family linkages. But in general, I find the people, the culture, the spirit of Malaysia is very much like South Africa. Very warm, very embracing.
And a lot of similarities.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
I think the weather is not the same.
The weather's different.
But the people, the multiculturalism.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, I think our love of life.
Absolutely. Very similar. Very similar.
And what's the if you would sum up South Africa in 3 words, just three different qualities. So the Malaysians look at South Africa and 3 distinct qualities. What would you say the 3 words are?
Vibrant, exciting, and futuristic.
And how would you define Malaysia in 3 words?
Very similar. Vibrant, exciting.
Are we futuristic, or would you change that to something?
Funny enough, that's another area I think we can cooperate, is in the 4th Industrial Revolution. There's a lot of work Malaysia's doing on the digital economy, on digitalization, that we can benefit from each other. Equally, South Africa, we're involved in a very huge project called the Square Kilometre Array, which has put South Africa at the forefront of the handling of big data. So there's areas of expertise that we are developing in the 2 countries in the 4th Industrial Revolution that I think if we work together will put us in the players of the future.
Well, here's to South Africa, Your Excellency, and Africa Rising.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Wonderful to meet you.
Wonderful.
Thank you.